Welcome to YOUCANIC. In this video we're going to show you how to replace the alternator on a Mercedes. Here we have the M272 engine, but the procedure is the same for also for the 273 engines as well. Now, what are those? This is the V6, the 273 is the V8. Typically this engine was found in most Mercedes models that ended with 350, so E350, CLK350, ML350 from 2006 to about 2012. So this is where, and that's gasoline engines, this is where this applies. Also for the V8, it's the same engine as well, the same layout, procedure is the same. The only problem is you're going to have a little bit, the engine is 2 more cylinders, comes out a little bit more, so you have a little bit less room. But that's typically your 550s. So any S550, any E550, CLK 550s, anything that ends with a 550 from about 2005 to 2012, or 2005, 2006, 2012, depending on the market. US models and European models had different production years for that, but that's where this is going to apply. I'm going to go over the steps really quick. So if you're getting a red battery light on the dashboard, very likely you could have an issue where the alternator is not charging. 8 out of 10 times it's actually this regulator. This goes in the back, it's mounted there, it's from another car. Has these brushes on the inside, and these wear out where they no longer make contact. So typically you can just replace this. You can sometimes, on some models, you can replace this with the alternator still in the car from underneath. It's a little bit harder and you kind of need to know where the bolts are. It's usually most shops will just gonna replace the whole alternator because they don't want to spend the time with the regulator and then it's not it. But the regulator itself, though, if you're doing this yourself, you can try just the regulator because you can find these for like $30, $40 or $50, and that most likely is going to fix your issue. So the procedure is very simple on these cars. You have, first you got to start by disconnecting the battery. You always do that because you're working with a 12 volt feed right here. And the other thing is that the next step is going to be to just remove these cover here, this, and then because we need to get the serpentine belt off, you're gonna make sure that you take a picture of the serpentine belt, how it's routed, because you're gonna come and try to put it back and you're gonna forget how the belt was routed. But to take off this belt, very simple. You have a 17 millimeter there, and we're going to show you in a minute where you put a wrench there, you push that down, and then you can slide the belt off. That's pretty straightforward. Alternator has this connector on the back. You press this and pull, and then you have this typically a 13 millimeter bolt here. It has a cap. You pull out the cap first, and then you take off that bolt. Always make sure that your battery is disconnected though when you're working on this. Then you have 4 bolts, as you can see here, 1, 2, and 2 on the bottom. The bottom ones can be easier on some models to get off from the bottom. The top ones you can get from here. The bolts are actually Torx bolt, so a E12 is what they're designed to be, but sometimes I like to use a 10 millimeter. Here I have a ratcheting 10 millimeter, and this just speeds up the process a lot. Once I get them loose, I can take those off with this wrench. But that's it. It's pretty straightforward, and then you put everything back together. I'm going to get started and replace this, and you can watch me as I do that. If you have any questions, make sure to leave it in the comment sections. So let's get started. Okay, so in this case we have the battery under the passenger seat. You actually don't have to lift the seat. We have this up because we did some testing, but what you can do is you can come here and you lift up the carpet a little bit. You'll see the negative is right there. You have is a 10 millimeter bolt. You can actually disconnect that right there without, simply just push the seat all the way back, and that will get exposed right there. Just disconnect that and then reconnect it when you're done. Just disconnecting the positive in this case is just easier to have a 10 millimeter in my hand, and I'm gonna go with this instead since I have everything exposed. But yep, you can simply just disconnect right there without taking the seat off. Just keep that in mind. Okay, Okay, so we remove this engine cover right there, just the front piece. We remove these air hoses. And then we have the tensioner here. We gotta take off that belt. Right underneath the tensioner, that right there is where you put your 17mm and you push down. And then you can slide the belt off, and that's it. You don't need to completely remove it, but right here where we have the alternator, we can just slide it off of it right there. We'll move that off to the side. Okay, so we're gonna loosen these two upper bolts. Oh, I gotta take off the lower one. This front one is can be pretty easy because I can feel that right there. And if you're not sure, you can get access that from the bottom if you like. Just make sure you secure the vehicle. And even though I cannot see it, it's pretty easy to access. If you're working on a V8, you're gonna probably have to do this one from the bottom. You're not gonna have this much room up here at the front. Now, one thing to keep in mind, this is the ground wire. It's actually on that bolt. So make sure when you reconnect, you're gonna reconnect that. When you put the new alternator in, make sure you have the ground wire connected to that bolt. I'm going to leave that on. It's almost off, but I will leave it there for a minute while I take off the lower back bolt, because that's just harder to get to, and I would like to get that one completely off, then take this off, front one off. Okay, so you saw where those bolts were on the alternator that's removed, so you have an idea. But if you can't, because you can't really see them right here, but if you just can't do it without seeing the bolts, just raise the vehicle a little bit on the passenger side, secure it with jack stands, lock the wheels from rolling backward forth, and then just get those two bolts off. Now, I've seen people who pull these off from the bottom. My concern with pulling them off from the bottom is because you have these transmission cooling lines that come to the cooler up here in the front, and that's a little bit of bending if you cause those to start leaking. So I prefer to pull these out of the front here. I might have to move a couple of cooling lines out of the way, but even if you damage something, I personally damage a cooling line up here on top that's easy to replace than a transmission line down there, as those are much harder to replace. There's the lower rear bolt right there. And this is pretty much off, so I'm going to hold it up a little bit while I take off the last bolt. Now when you put the new alternator in, this is the alternator. You can see here it just like mounts on the side and it just wants to fold down. So when you put the new one in, this is going to be pretty hard if you don't have any help. Somebody needs to hold the alternator, and you line up the holes and start fitting those bolts by hand. Alright, I'm going to take the alternator is off. I'm going to take the bolt off. Remember, here we have the ground wire on this bolt. You can see the ground wire right there. We're just going to pull the bolt out. Make sure to reinstall that. Okay, now that this is loose, we can pull it forward a little bit. You have the wire that comes to the regulator. You have to press on that and pull back. As you can see, press and pull back on that. And then further down, you have the positive. It has a cap on it, where you simply just pull that off. And that should be a 12mm. Now here's the thing to keep in mind. You have to have the battery disconnected for this step, otherwise you're gonna cause all kind of shorts. Okay, so this should be a 13 one. Both didn't fit. Okay. You gotta take that nut completely off and then remove the positive wires going to it. Okay. So that's off, and this alternator should now come up. Alright, you can see the alternator, positive right there, connector went right in there, and the bolts, lower, upper. Alright, before you put the new alternator in, make sure you compare it to the old. Make sure you test this connector here. A lot of times, if it's from another vehicle or another model and it doesn't fit, that connector is just not going to go in. So make sure you check that. So the first thing we need to do is we come in here and we connect the positive. We put that 13mm bolt back on. Now be careful you don't drop that nut, otherwise you have to crawl under the car to get that. Then I'm going to go ahead and tighten that. Next, I'm going to put the alternator bolts in first, and then I'll connect the electrical wire, because I can connect this wire even when the alternator is up. I don't want to put a lot of tension while I'm trying to get these bolts up. I don't want to pull. If I plug that wire here, I'm just going to be moving this alternator. It might drop while I'm trying to put the bolts or whatever, and it could damage that wire or this connector right here. So instead of doing that, I'm just going to put the bolts up first. So here's where it gets tricky, and here's where you need some help putting these bolts up right here. So I'm going to start with this upper front bolt first and see if I can get that one in. So one of the most challenging parts of this job is lining up the alternator bolts with the holes in the engine block to put these bolts back in. So like I said, it helps to have somebody help, but at the same time they're most likely going to be helped if they can hold it up from underneath and you put the bolts up on top, or vice versa, they can hold up on top and you can try to put the lower two bolts. Even as soon as you get one bolt threaded, you got to be careful with that. As soon as you get one bolt threaded, it'll be a lot easier to put the rest of them. You have to be careful with that first bolt, because you might go at an angle and then you'll strip the threads on the engine block, and that's going to be a problem. So I'm tightening that last bolt, that bottom rear bolt. Now almost done with this one. Okay, so that back one is tight here. Lower front, make sure you reconnect the ground wire. In some cases it might be connected up here to the top. It doesn't really matter as long as the wire is long enough to take some scratch basically when the engine moves. I'm just double checking all the bolts. One tip that might really help you when you put the alternator up is to get another bolt that's as long as the alternator bolt, but thinner, smaller diameter, or get a drill bit that's smaller diameter again, and then have this be the first one and line it up and hold that to just kind of line up your first bolt. So what I did here, I put it up on the back here, on the upper back one, and I was able to line up that bolt, and I went ahead and put this bolt in. Make sure you don't push this all the way in. Once I let it go, it just fell straight out. But yeah, that can help, something like that, to just line up one hole and then you put the bolt on the other one, and then it's easier to put the rest of them. So that's it. I haven't connected the connector to the voltage regulator, but that's pretty easy. It only goes in one direction, so don't push it too hard. If it doesn't fit, I have to rotate it 180. Yep. Press it until you hear that click. And here is the belt. Make sure the belt is sitting properly over all the grooves. Okay. Alright. And then we take our 17. Again, we're going to push down. Same thing, that brings up the tensioner. And we slide that over. And then here, the last thing you want to do is you want to check the belt, make sure it's sitting properly on these grooves, because sometimes it sits over the edge, and then what will happen after a few miles, this belt is just going to start shredding apart, so you don't want to do that. So check it even over here, over to the AC and the power steering pump. Run your hand over, make sure it's sitting flush. But that's good. All we have to do now is put these hoses, everything that we took off, and put the engine cover on, connect the battery, and start it. So I'm gonna leave this like this for a minute. I'm gonna connect the battery and we're gonna see if that's charging. It is 14%, so you can see that's charging. And to do the test, of course, you can connect to the battery, or you have the battery terminal, the positive right over here. The black can go to ground, the bolt, you have the negative terminal right here if you want to connect to that. You should have about 12.5, 12.7. This battery is a little bit discharged, but once you start the engine, like you saw, it should jump over to about 14. It should be anywhere between 13.8 up to 14.5 or 14.6. So that alternator is good, it's charging, and that's it. As you saw, you can really do that in about an hour, a couple hours if you're doing that for the first time, replacing that alternator. Again, it could be most likely just a regulator that's worn out, but typically you just replace the new one. If you're buying a used one, it's just going to come alternator, regulator all in one piece. But that's simple, easy DIY. You can do it at home. This tool right here is what would really help you. 10mm, and that bends like that. That's gonna really help you. Technically those bolts are E12 Torx. Make sure that when you're done, put back this cap on the back for the positive. And that's it. Thank you for watching.